The sun was just rising over the lake, casting that golden glow that makes everything look like a postcard. I was sipping my coffee, toes dangling off the edge of my dock, and watching my boat bob gently in the water. The quiet of the morning was perfect, almost too perfect. You know that feeling when something is so calm that it's almost suspicious? Yeah, that feeling hit me like a brick. That's when I noticed her, across the lake, standing with her hands on her hips, packing back and forth like she owned the place. And technically she didn't, but to her the whole neighborhood belonged to Karen, HOA Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of perfect lawns and pristine docks. I've known her long enough to read the signs, the muttered curses, the sharp glances, the way she straightens her perfectly manicured hair as if it gives her extra authority. I took another sip of coffee and watched as she marched toward my dock, muttering about unauthorized docking and violations. Her pace was almost cartoonish, the kind you'd see in a movie where the villain is about to blow a gasket over something petty. And that's exactly what this was, petty, except I had a front row seat to her impending meltdown. Now I'll admit I love this part, the calm before the storm, watching her steam up while I'm literally sitting on my own dock, legally tied to my own boat. The satisfaction was delicious. I leaned back on my hands and smiled. "Good morning, Karen," I called casually, my tone like I was greeting a neighbor over a fence. She didn't hear me, too busy talking into her phone, probably reporting some emergency that didn't exist. I wasn't worried, not even a little. I own this dock, every inch of it. The water, the wood, the metal fittings that creak when the boat shifts, mine. And yet Karen had that look in her eyes, the kind that screams, "I will not be." My stomach tightened just a little. This was going to be interesting. Minutes passed. I watched her lift the phone to her ear and gesticulate wildly. I imagine the dispatcher's face right now, trying to parse Karen's frantic, breathless explanation. "There's a suspicious boat. It's on the dock. I think it's trespassing." I could almost hear the pause on the other end, the suppressed sigh, the mental eye roll that only comes after years of answering calls from people who treat the world like their personal chessboard. Meanwhile, I sat there, coffee cooling, soaking in the absurdity of the moment. I could see her typing furiously, maybe sending texts to the HOA board, maybe threatening to call the police. And honestly, let her. It was the calm before her personal hurricane, and I had a front row seat. As she paced closer, I stood up, hands in my pockets, feet firm on the dock. Her expression changed slightly when she realized I was aware of her presence. I could see her lips moving, muttering under her breath. "This isn't legal," she, typical Karen, overconfident. Then came the dramatic gesture. She pointed at my boat like I had stolen it from the harbor. I raised my eyebrows and grinned. "Interesting day for a call, huh?" I said casually, though I wasn't actually expecting a response. She had her eyes glued to her phone, talking faster than a courtroom stenographer could write. And that's when I knew it for sure. She wasn't just upset, she was about to escalate this. 911. She was going to call 911 over my own boat. The absurdity of it made me chuckle quietly, but there was also that spike of tension, the kind that makes your pulse quicken just a little, because what happens next is completely unpredictable. I leaned back again, resting my elbows on the dock, watching her flail from a safe distance. The water shimmered around the boat, gentle waves lapping against the hull. The world was quiet again except for Karen's frantic muttering. And in that calm, I felt it. The storm was coming, but I was ready. I own this dock, and no amount of Karen-induced chaos was going to change that. The phone call ended. Karen looked triumphant, as if she'd just reported the greatest crime of the century. I smiled, finishing the last sip of coffee. Let her play the hero. Let her summon the cavalry. It wasn't going to matter, not one bit. And that's when the first headlights appeared in the distance, flashing across the water, signaling that the real fun was about to begin. I had barely finished my coffee when I saw her, the storm in human form, marching around the dock, phone pressed to her ear, voice rising like she was narrating a disaster movie. "There's a suspicious boat. It's unauthorized. Someone's breaking the law." I swear, if she'd added, "and they might be stealing your souls," it wouldn't have surprised me. I stood there, arms crossed, enjoying the scene like I was at a theater, popcorn optional, because the thing is, she had no idea at all. I legally owned every inch of this dock, every single inch. The wood beneath her feet, the water surrounding my boat, the cleats holding my ropes, mine. She was calling 911 over property that was literally in my name. It was beautiful in its own absurd, chaotic way. Through the trees, I could see her packing, gesturing wildly, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to make sure the crime hadn't somehow gotten away. I imagined the dispatcher on the other end, doing that polite sigh people do when they've been trained to nod and listen, but really, they're already mentally drafting the coffee order they'll grab on their next break. Then she said it. "Yes, ma'am, there's a boat and I don't know whose it is and I think it's breaking the rules." Her voice had gone high-pitched, the kind of frantic tone that makes you wonder if she's narrating a horror story in real life. I had to resist laughing out loud. But I didn't. I stayed calm, leaning against the dock railing, my hands in my pockets, pretending to be completely oblivious to the chaos. Inside, I was buzzing with a mix of anticipation and amusement. I could almost feel the adrenaline in the air, the tension of someone convinced they are enforcing justice while standing on property that isn't theirs. She began packing closer, waving her hands for emphasis. Yes, it's right here by the dock. I'm telling you it's suspicious. I think they're breaking the law. I could see her taking notes in between sentences as if she was preparing a case for the Supreme Court over a boat that belonged to me. I resisted the urge to walk over and hand her the deed like a polite reminder. This is actually mine. As she continued, neighbors started to notice. I could see a few waving from their lawns, smirking as they pieced together what was happening. Everyone knew Karen. Everyone knew she loved an overreaction, especially when she could play the heroic enforcer. What she didn't know and would never suspect until it was too late was that I had all the legal documentation sitting neatly in my folder at home. She was building her own trap, unaware that she was about to walk straight into it. I watched her finish the call and press the phone to her chest, triumphant. They're sending someone, she whispered to herself, her eyes scanning the dock like she was about to battle an invading army. I chuckled quietly, shaking my head. This was going to be interesting. The tension hung in the air as I prepared for the next act. I could almost hear the dramatic music swelling, though in reality it was just the soft lap of water against my boat. But make no mistake, in a few minutes, the scene would be anything but peaceful. Then it happened. The first set of headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing across the lake and reflecting off the water. My heart didn't race because I knew I had nothing to worry about, but I could feel a thrill of anticipation. Karen was about to meet reality, and I was front row center for her meltdown. I took a deep breath, looking out over the lake, imagining the officers' faces as they arrived, trying to make sense of Karen's frantic story. Would they believe her? Could they understand that she had called 911 over a boat that was legally tied to its owner's dock? I stifled a laugh and shook my head. There was only one way to find out. Karen, oblivious to my smirk, continued her packing, muttering under her breath about rules and violations, and someone needs to teach them a lesson. I leaned back against the railing, watching the sun glint on the water, the boat gently rocking, and I thought, this was going to be a story worth remembering. The calm morning had vanished, the stage was set, and the real fun was about to begin. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when I saw them, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the water like some kind of early morning disco. The hum of the engines grew louder, and I felt the faint thrill of anticipation. This was the moment Karen had been building toward with her 911 call, and I had the best seat in the house. By the time the officers stepped onto the dock, Karen was practically vibrating with excitement. Her chest puffed up like a peacock, as if she had personally summoned the cavalry to enforce justice. Yes, you see, they're trespassing, illegal activity. She jabbed at my boat with a trembling finger, her voice practically echoing across the lake. I could hear the officers exchanging glances, the polite kind that say, "We've heard stranger complaints, but this is definitely peculiar." One of them cleared his throat, giving Karen a careful, professional nod. She practically glowed with pride, waiting for them to take action. I decided it was time to make my entrance. Calmly, I stepped forward, coffee mug in hand, and put my hands up in the universal no worries gesture. "Good morning, officers," I said with a smile, voice smooth as the lake itself. "I think there's been a little misunderstanding." Karen froze mid-gesture, jaw dropping slightly as if she had just seen a ghost, or worse, someone defying her personally constructed narrative. This is," she sputtered, words tripping over each other like toddlers learning to speak. I gestured casually to my boat, then to the dock. "This is my boat, this is my dock, all perfectly legal, all properly registered, and I'm very sorry if there's been any confusion." The officer's expressions shifted from confusion to cautious realization. One glanced down at the paperwork he had in his folder, squinting at the little printed lines and numbers. Another officer whispered to his partner, the classic, "I think this is about to get awkward" look. Karen, meanwhile, was floundering. No, you can't, you don't understand, this is against the rules." Her voice cracked, half disbelief, half outrage. I almost laughed out loud. She was standing there, red-faced, waving her arms, trying to convince law enforcement that the dock I owned was somehow a crime scene. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, like static before a lightning strike. The officers were trying hard not to laugh, and Karen's grip on reality was slipping with every passing second. I leaned casually on the railing, smiling politely, letting the absurdity of the moment hang heavy in the air. Then came the line that made my day. One officer looked directly at Karen and said, "Ma'am, do you have proof that you own this dock?" Her face went pale. "The HOA." The HOA doesn't own it, the officer said calmly, turning to me. Do you have documentation proving ownership? I nodded, reaching into my bag and pulling out the neatly organized folder with deeds and legal papers. I handed it to the officer with a casual, almost bored air. Here you go, everything in order. Karen's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. She tried to open her mouth, but the words seemed to fail her. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, desperately searching for a loophole that didn't exist. The officer skimmed the papers, then looked at me. Everything checks out. You own the dock and the boat. Ma'am, I don't think there's anything more we need to do here. Karen's jaw dropped. I could feel her internal meltdown, the slow, painful realization that she had just called the cops on property that wasn't hers to police. Her face went red, then purple, then a shade I can only describe as I should have stayed home. I sipped the last bit of my coffee, smiling politely, enjoying every second of the scene. Karen was standing there, flustered, defeated, and completely powerless. The officers started to back away, trying not to get caught up in the awkwardness, leaving Karen standing alone, muttering something about rules and next time. I looked out over the lake, the boat rocking gently, the sun glinting on the water. Calm had returned, for now, but I knew one thing: Karen wasn't done, not even close. And that, my friends, is how the real drama begins. By now, Karen's meltdown had reached levels I didn't even think were humanly possible. She was packing like a caged tiger, arms flailing, muttering about rules and violations, and someone needs to teach them a lesson. Every word she said was louder, more desperate than the last, as if the sheer volume might magically make her right. I stood on my dock, leaning casually on the railing, watching her squirm. The officers had politely retreated to the edge of the dock, clearly trying to suppress the urge to laugh. One of them even gave me a small, sympathetic nod. I returned it with a polite smile, sipping my coffee, pretending I wasn't entirely entertained by the chaos. Karen spun around abruptly and faced me, eyes wild. You can't just do whatever you want. That's not how this works. There are rules, laws, ordinances. I tilted my head, raising an eyebrow. You're right, Karen, I said in my friendliest voice. There are rules, and as it happens, I follow every single one, including the ones about ownership. That dock, mine. That boat, also mine. Everything here is perfectly legal. Her face contorted in disbelief, her cheeks red, almost purple. That's impossible, she sputtered. You can't, I mean the HOA. The HOA doesn't own my property, I said, evenly shrugging. And that includes the dock. Sorry if that's inconvenient. She looked like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. Her hands went to her head, fingers gripping her hair as if trying to pull out the problem at its root. She spun around and waved toward the officers, trying to get them back on her side. See, they don't care. This is why rules exist. This is why you need enforcement. The officers shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat, politely saying, Ma'am, as long as the property is legally owned and there's no criminal activity, there's really nothing we can do. Karen froze, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I could almost hear the gears in her brain grinding, desperate to find some loophole, some magical way to regain control. But there wasn't one, not today. I leaned back against the railing, pretending to casually admire the lake. The sunlight shimmered on the water, my boat bobbing gently, everything calm as ever. I could see Karen's frustration rising like steam from a boiling pot. It was both hilarious and satisfying. There's a strange kind of joy in watching someone overestimate their authority and then completely implode. Then came the next level of her meltdown. She stomped her foot, pointing directly at me. You're flaunting it, you're flaunting your rights. This is why the HOA exists, to stop people like you. I laughed softly. Karen, I'm not flaunting anything. I'm just living my life legally on my own property. But don't worry, I'm sure the HOA will love to review my ownership papers. I even have extra copies for them if you want. That did it. Her face went from red to bright red. She looked like she had just realized the universe itself had turned against her. Her hands shook and her voice dropped an octave as she whispered, This isn't over. I'll make it right. I tilted my head, smirking. Oh, I'm sure you will, Karen. I'm sure you will. Just maybe take a moment to enjoy the lake while you figure it out. Karen spun on her heel and marched back toward her property, muttering threats under her breath about next time and official action. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief and amusement. She looked like someone who had just lost an epic battle to reality but refused to accept it. I took a deep breath and looked out over the lake. The water was calm again, the boat gently rocked against the dock, and for a brief moment everything felt peaceful, but I knew it wouldn't last. Karen was plotting, always plotting. The storm wasn't over, it had just shifted to another front. And that's when I realized the next act of this absurd drama was inevitable: the HOA board. Karen would drag me there, she'd parade her grievances, and I'd have to face the full spectacle of her theatrics in an official setting. I smiled, finishing my coffee, the calm before the next storm. This was going to be fun. The next morning, I drove up to the HOA clubhouse, trying to act casual, though my stomach did a little flip. This was going to be interesting. Karen had officially scheduled a board meeting to challenge my dock ownership. I could almost hear her internal monologue. I will teach them all a lesson. I will assert my authority. I will, and I had to suppress a grin because deep down, I knew the reality was about to crush her. The clubhouse smelled faintly of coffee and desperation. The board members were seated around the table, papers stacked neatly in front of them. They all nodded politely as I walked in, trying their best to appear neutral. Neutrality in an HOA meeting is mostly a show. Everyone has an opinion and everyone knows it, but today the stage was mine. Karen, of course, arrived shortly after me, full of dramatic flair. She had clearly spent the morning rehearsing her speech. Her hair was perfect, her outfit immaculate, and her expression screamed, "I am about to deliver justice." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, pretending to casually glance at my phone while secretly enjoying every second. She started immediately, pointing at me as if I were a criminal in a courtroom. "This person is breaking the rules. They're flaunting property laws, dock violations, boat trespassing." Her words tumbled over each other, and she was so animated that one board member almost spilled her coffee. I waited until she took a breath and then calmly interjected. "Good morning. I appreciate everyone's time. I have all legal documentation proving my ownership of the dock and the boat." I slid a neat folder across the table. The board members glanced at it, their eyes flicking from the papers to me and back. Karen gasped, clutching her pearls figuratively. Literally, she had brought pearls, and began stammering. That can't be. You can't. This isn't fair." I smiled politely. "It's fair, it's the law, and it's all here in black and white." The room grew tense. Board members leaned forward, reading the documents carefully. One member whispered to another. Karen's confidence was visibly crumbling under their scrutiny. The atmosphere was thick with suspense. Every second stretched out like hours. The HOA board, the ultimate referees of suburban order, were staring down the evidence, and Karen had nothing left to throw at them. Karen tried one last desperate tactic. But the rules, community standards, everyone knows," her voice faltered. The words were hollow, echoing in the room. No one answered. Even the supportive neighbors, she probably thought she had nothing to say. I leaned forward, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "The rules matter, yes, but they can't override legal ownership. That's why I brought the paperwork. The dock is mine, the boat is mine, everything here is properly documented." The chairman, a calm man with a kind but firm expression, cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the documents. Legally, there's no dispute. The property is indeed owned by the attendee here. Karen, I'm afraid the board cannot enforce any rule against someone's private property. Case closed." Karen froze, the color drained from her face as she processed the words. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like someone who had just been hit by reality, and it wasn't pretty. Her fists clenched at her sides as if sheer willpower could change the outcome. I sipped my water calmly, enjoying the silence that followed. The tension in the room was tangible. Karen's storm had been diffused, but she hadn't left quietly, her eyes still burned with the need to prove something, to regain control. But the truth was undeniable. Then she muttered, almost under her breath, I'll appeal, I'll make them see," but no one was listening. The room had moved on, the board had spoken, the evidence was clear: my dock, my boat, my property, end of story. As the meeting wrapped up, I smiled politely at the board and nodded at Karen. "Thank you for your time. I hope this clears up any confusion." Karen stormed out, muttering about next time and official action, but the audience, me, the neighbors, the board knew the truth. For now, the dock was safe, the boat was safe, and Karen's reign of suburban terror had met its first serious obstacle. I walked out of the clubhouse, breathing deeply, savoring the calm after the storm. Little did I know, Karen wasn't done. She was already plotting her next move, and whatever she had in mind, it was going to be dramatic. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up to a calm, almost smug satisfaction. For once, Karen's theatrics hadn't derailed the peace of my dock. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped outside, letting the sun hit my face. The water was calm, my boat gently rocking, everything perfectly normal. For a moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally learned her lesson. Of course, I was wrong. Karen never learns. By mid-morning, the first signs of her next move became obvious. A neighbor came by, struggling to hide a smirk, and whispered, "Karen's talking to everyone about appealing the board's decision." I almost laughed out loud. Appealing, over my dock, over my boat, the audacity was incredible. I decided to stay calm, observing the unfolding chaos with the same patience I'd shown so far. This wasn't a battle I had to win with anger, it was a performance, and I had a front row seat. Karen was about to experience reality in a way she had never expected. Later that day, I received a call from one of the board members. They were polite but firm. "Just to be clear," they said, "we've reviewed everything. There is no ambiguity. You own the dock, you own the boat. There is nothing Karen can do within the HOA framework to challenge this." I thanked them, hanging up with a quiet sense of triumph. I knew Karen hadn't heard the last of this. She never does, but the tension had shifted. The truth was out there, undeniable, and there was nothing she could do to twist it. Around noon, I decided to walk down to the dock. The sunlight glimmered on the water and my boat floated like a silent sentinel. I took a deep breath, appreciating the peace while it lasted, and then I saw her, Karen, standing on the far side of the lake, staring across at me with a mixture of disbelief, fury, and something I can only describe as wounded pride. Her face was red, her arms crossed. She looked like she had been caught in a trap of her own making, and indeed she had. Every dramatic gesture she had made, every frantic phone call, every muttered complaint, it all collapsed under the weight of reality. She had assumed authority that didn't exist, challenged property she didn't own, and now she was confronted with the undeniable truth. The dock was mine, and she had no power here. I walked closer, keeping my tone calm but firm. "Morning, Karen, beautiful day, isn't it?" Her eyes narrowed. This isn't fair, you can't just. "I can," I interrupted gently. "Because it's my property, Karen. Everything here is legal, everything is documented. You called the authorities, you scheduled the HOA meeting, and yet here we are, calm, peaceful, and entirely within my rights." She flailed her hands. "But the rules, the community standards, you're undermining everything." I chuckled quietly. The community standards apply to property owned by the community or by the HOA, not to mine, the dock, the boat, everything here, it's mine. And I'm following all the laws, that's it. Karen's face fell, her shoulders slumping like a balloon losing air. I could almost see the moment the realization struck her. No amount of yelling, complaining, or appealing would change a single fact. She had built her storm entirely on assumptions, and reality had crashed it to pieces. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and empathy. She wasn't evil, just incredibly, spectacularly misguided. Still, the drama she had brought to my peaceful life was unforgettable. As I walked back to the dock, the sun reflecting off the water, I knew one thing: Karen might try again. She might post signs, call the police once more, or send letters. But the foundation was solid. Legal, undeniable, completely mine. I sat down, sipping my coffee, and watched the gentle waves lap against the dock. The tension of the morning and the HOA meeting had dissipated. For the first time in days, I could relax. The storm had hit and passed, leaving calm waters behind. Karen had learned a lesson, at least temporarily, that some battles are not hers to fight. And yet I knew she was already plotting her next move. The lake was calm, the dock secure, and my boat untouched. But in the world of HOA, Karen, peace is always temporary. And the suspense, that's what makes this story worth watching. Just when I thought the storm had passed, I noticed something strange a few days later. As I strolled down to the dock, coffee in hand, I saw her, HOA Karen, sneaking around the edge of my property, carrying a stack of signs. Yes, signs, big, garish, private property, no trespassing signs, the kind that scream intimidation rather than legality. I couldn't help but chuckle. Her audacity was unmatched. Here she was, trying to assert control over property she had no right to touch. She looked around like a conspirator in a spy movie, making sure no one was watching her operation. The neighbors, of course, were all too amused to intervene. Some even waved discreetly, suppressing laughter as she fumbled with her signs. I walked over, hands in my pockets, trying to appear casual. "Nice morning, Karen," I called out. "Beautiful lake today, isn't it?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. You're not supposed to." I waved her off, smiling. "Relax, I just wanted to see what you're up to." She stammered, fumbling with the signs. I'm just keeping the rules, community standards, enforcing." I shook my head, laughing quietly. "You do know these signs don't give you any authority here, right? I own this dock, Karen, the boat, the water, the entire pier, everything, legally, and there's nothing the HOA or anyone else can do to change that." Her face turned red. She tried to respond, but words failed her. Instead, she muttered something about next time and official action, waving her hands in frustration. I took a step closer, still calm, watching her struggle with the obvious truth she refused to accept. Then came the next move in her absurd plan. A tow truck appeared. I watched from a distance, curious, as Karen tried to explain that my boat was unauthorized and needed to be removed. The driver, a tall, patient man, squinted at her papers. "Ma'am, this says the dock and boat are privately owned. I'm not towing anything here." Her jaw dropped, and for a moment I swear time slowed. She looked like a cartoon character who had just been hit with a mallet. Her plans crumbled one by one before my very eyes. I had to suppress a laugh, the kind that's equal parts amusement and disbelief. I walked closer to the scene, coffee in hand, letting her stew in her own frustration. "Looks like the universe disagrees with your strategy, Karen," I said casually. She turned to me, eyes blazing, voice trembling. You can't, this isn't over, I'll make them see. Her threats faltered as the tow driver shook his head and drove away, leaving her standing alone with her pile of useless signs. Neighbors peeked from behind hedges, some waving discreetly, some stifling laughter. Karen's humiliation was complete, but she refused to walk away quietly. I knew she was plotting, thinking of some next big move that would finally get me off my dock. The suspense was palpable. What would she try next? I leaned against the railing, sipping my coffee. Calm, steady, unbothered. Every dramatic gesture she made, every muttered threat, only confirmed the truth. She had no control here. She had built a hurricane of her own making, and reality had left her spinning in the eye of it. Karen muttered something under her breath and stomped off toward her house, muttering about appealing again, probably plotting a new campaign of complaints, notices, and maybe even more phone calls to 911. I smiled to myself. Let her try. Let her flail. The dock was mine, the boat was mine, and for now the lake was calm. I took a deep breath, letting the tension drain. The spectacle had been entertaining, to say the least, and I felt a rare sense of satisfaction. The calm of the water reflected the calm in my mind. Karen's last-ditch effort had failed spectacularly, and the absurdity of it all made me laugh quietly. And yet I knew she wasn't done, never truly done. The suspense lingered in the air like a charged storm cloud on a sunny day. Karen was plotting, scheming, and convinced that somehow, someway she could regain control. But for now, I could enjoy the quiet, my boat floating gently against the dock, the water shimmering in the sun. The storm had passed, the victory was mine, the suspense was resolved for the moment, but in the world of HOA Karen, calm waters never last long. Finally, after days of chaos, phone calls, and Karen's endless scheming, the dock was calm. The sun sparkled on the water, my boat floated peacefully, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could actually breathe. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, stepped onto the dock, and took it all in. The gentle lap of water against the hull, the faint smell of pine from the surrounding trees, it was perfect. I leaned back, hands behind my head, and let myself smile. Karen had tried everything, calling 911, dragging me to the HOA board, posting signs, and even sending a tow truck. Every single move had failed spectacularly. The dock was legally mine, the boat was safe, and the HOA had finally recognized the obvious truth. I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. I didn't even have to look to know it was Karen. She never gave up completely. I turned slowly, smiling politely. She was standing at the edge of the property line, arms crossed, face red with frustration, and muttering under her breath. "This isn't over," she said. I chuckled softly. "Karen, it's over. The dock is mine, the boat is mine, the water is mine, the paperwork is clear. There's nothing left for you to do." Her eyes narrowed, but even she seemed to realize the futility of the moment. She muttered something incoherent and stomped off toward her house. I knew she was already thinking about the next plan, the next complaint, the next dramatic scene she could stage, but for now, victory was mine. Neighbors started drifting by, some waving discreetly, others giving small nods of approval. I waved back, smiling. A few even stopped to chat. "That Karen," one neighbor whispered, barely suppressing a laugh, "she really does not give up, does she?" "Nope," I said with a grin, "but the dock, the boat, everything is safe. For now, the lake is mine." I stepped back onto the dock, coffee in hand, and watched the gentle movement of the boat. Everything was calm, peaceful, exactly how it should be. The chaos of the last few days felt surreal now. Karen's dramatic phone calls, frantic gestures, and endless complaints, it all seemed like a distant storm that had finally passed. I thought about how absurd it all had been. The fact that someone could spend days, even weeks, obsessing over a dock and a boat that they had no right to touch was both terrifying and hilarious. But the real satisfaction came from watching the truth win. Legal ownership, calm reasoning, and patience had outlasted Karen's drama. As the sun climbed higher, I could finally relax completely. I took a deep sip of coffee and sat down on the dock, legs dangling over the edge. The water sparkled, reflecting the bright sky, and I felt a rare sense of contentment. For now, the dock was mine, the boat was mine, and the lake was calm. But as I watched Karen retreat in the distance, muttering and plotting, I couldn't help but smile knowingly. In the world of HOA Karen, calm waters are always temporary. She would be back, scheming, complaining, trying again. And the suspense was the only thing that kept life interesting. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me. Coffee in hand, boat bobbing gently at the dock, I allowed myself a moment of pure triumph. The paperwork was in order, the HOA was satisfied, the authorities had confirmed it, all evidence was on my side. I had survived the Karen storm, and the dock was still mine. I sipped my coffee one last time, looking out over the lake. The gentle waves glistened in the morning sun, the birds chirped lazily, and for once there was nothing to worry about. Karen had lost this battle, and I had won. And yet, as any seasoned HOA survivor knows, the war is never truly over. Karen was out there somewhere plotting her next move, scheming her next dramatic scene. But for today, for this morning, peace had been restored. The dock, the boat, the water, they were mine, and nothing could change that. I laughed quietly to myself, shaking my head. HOA Karen may never stop, but I had learned one thing: patience, preparation, and a little humor go a long way when dealing with someone who thinks the world revolves around their rules. The lake was calm, the dock was secure, and the boat rocked gently in the morning light. For now, victory was mine, and the story would be one to remember for years to come. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.